It's Friday. I'm Kyle. That's CJ. CJ, gonna give you a couple numbers here. 2025 at the All-Star break, the Toronto Blue Jays were 55 and 41, and much was made of their second half surge to propel them to that division championship. 2026 this year, heading into the quote unquote second half, the Toronto Blue Jays are 45 and 51. When is it time to be realistic about whether or not this team can make the playoffs once again?
Yeah, I think you could put a fork in them. Quite honestly, you look at the number and you see the 2.5 games, and you kind of get excited about that. Say, hey, we still got a chance, and I can appreciate that kind of optimism. But reality tells you that when you have to leapfrog 5 teams to have that final spot in the wild card, and this team is playing the way that it is right now, what is it, 6-12 over their last 18, kind of leading into the break, and only those 6 wins because of that little 3 game win streak near the end. I don't have a lot of that optimism. It's always great when you can be that person as a fan, but I don't share it right now. There's just too much work to be done, and you have not been able to hit that stretch that you were looking for, and too many teams, I think, in front of you right now as well for the Blue Jays. So I'm generally one of these guys that's like, hey, you're not out of it until you're mathematically out of it. But because we are looking at this trade deadline, because the Jays, I think, have some opportunities to do some things, I believe that the shift has got to be there for the front office right now. They'll continue to watch, right? You have 5 series leading up to that trade deadline on August 3rd. And certainly if they were to go on some kind of run where it's 8-2, 9-1 over a 10-game span, it's a lot easier to pivot the other way. But I think they have to prepare, not for any kind of major sell off, but looking at your roster and saying, yeah, this is going to be really tough for us to make it. Who can we move to make sure we're not in this position a year from now?
Yeah, and sticking with that number that you had mentioned, the 2.5 games back of a wild card spot, it's not that number. It's, as you say, the number of teams you would have to leapfrog to get there because you simply can't rely on the rest of the American League continuing to flounder as they have
Mm-mm.
en masse like this. Like it's one of these teams or two of maybe three of these teams are going to get hot down the stretch, going to piece together a lot of 7-3 stretches of 10 games and leave the Jays clear in the dust. And it's just, an injury plague season, it is what it is. But as you mentioned, going into this second half here, you've got 16 games until the trade deadline. And this baseball team would have to finish the last 66 games 40 and 26 to even match the lowest ever American League
Mm.
wild card total of wins of 85. The numbers don't look good.
They don't, and I do think a lot of times for teams that are in this position or maybe even feeling a little bit better about themselves, you are also going to talk about, are we going to get better from within, right? Is that something that we feel like is going to happen soon? I'm not sure the Jays necessarily can say that either, because you could look at, okay, hey, we got a couple of guys coming back that we think are going to be able to help us, right? We've been waiting and waiting on Addison Barger, right? That's not going to happen. Anthony Santander, that's not going to happen, right? And these guys that you were hoping could kind of come give you that boost, then say, okay, well, that plus if we can add this or that, then it's probably worth going for. This just doesn't feel like that in that spot. Those numbers you're talking about and what they need to do to basically just tie the worst team to make the postseason. It just doesn't seem realistic, unfortunately, at this point. And then you mentioned some of the teams, right, that are going to get hot, and we started to see it. Right, the Boston Red Sox
Yeah.
finished with a 9-game winning streak heading into the All Star break. That has changed a lot as far as, first of all, how we look at that team. Their chances of getting to the postseason have increased dramatically. It's also changed the way we look at the deadline. And not just affecting Jays, but everybody around baseball, because they had some pieces I think teams were very interested in that they were very likely going to move. Now, if they lose 9 straight coming out of the break, then maybe we're having that conversation again. But we've now moved away from it. So they have been playing really well. The Astros are one of those teams that are out in front of the Jays that I still think have another run in them, even though they sputtered here and trying to get it all figured out. I think that's all has to come into the equation. Where you are, where your roster is. Do we really think it's going to get better from within? What about the teams in front of us? How real are what they doing? Who's going to get hot? And all the answers just kind of unfortunately keep pointing back to the fact that the Jays facing a major uphill battle.
And it's not even that, but just to put a cap on this part of the conversation, they come out of the All-Star break playing the first place White Sox, the first place
Hmm.
Tampa Bay Rays, and the hottest team in baseball, the Boston Red Sox. Like everything is now stacked against them. And so moving to what you had mentioned earlier, 16 games from the trade deadline at this point, where does that position this Jays team? Because had this roster not been injured the way it had been and performed even close to expectations, this is a playoff team all day, but it
Yeah.
just hasn't gone that way. So, how does a team like this in this position with these guys signed, a few guys coming, a few guys going, how do they position themselves at this trade deadline?
Yeah, so I think you get through those first 3 series that you're talking about, then you got the Nationals and the Cardinals, right? The last 2 kind of leading into it. You're gonna have your real hard answer after, I think, these first 3 because of the competition level, that we've talked about. So now it comes down to, okay, what do we realistically have to move that other teams would be interested in, right? Like, the biggest piece that the Jays have that should not be going anywhere on the pitching side in that bullpen is Louis Varland. I think obviously that was a great acquisition for them, but he's still gonna be under 3 years of service time. So while you look at that piece and saying, that'd be really highly valuable in the market. They're not going into any version of a deep rebuild. He stays put. I think that's a really easy decision. Kevin Gosman should also be an easy decision to move, right? I know there's a couple of rough ones in there, but the overall numbers are still really good. The swing and miss, the strikeout numbers are solid. He is the guy you're probably having most of the conversations about right now because starting pitching comes at a premium. Starting pitching is very hard to move at the deadline. That is going to be the conversation that we're going to have the most. And I think for the Jays in their front office, they can really sit back and have a lot of conversations. As I mentioned, the Red Sox and kind of what they have done, that takes Sonny Gray, at least for now, out of the conversation. That was going to be a big one. The Tigers have played better. I still think they're a subtraction team. But they have 3 starters that a lot of people have talked about as well. But I think Kevin Gosman is going to be one of the bigger names that we'll talk about here at the deadline for a lot of teams involved. So that's the focus. That's where you feel like you can get some of your best return. I'm also was looking at the roster and saying, are there any of these guys that are still under control for another year beyond this one that maybe you would like to move? They unfortunately really don't have that piece, right? Jeff Hoffman is not having the year you'd like him to be having right now. It's better than $12 million in salary. It's a good example of a guy who's got another year left that in their position they probably could move if he was performing a little bit better. If they want to eat a lot of money, they probably could do that, but I don't think it makes sense at this point. Maybe he finishes strong and it's an off-season type of conversation. We know what's going on with Shane Bieber. He would, if he was effective, be another kind of topic of conversation. That isn't happening just yet. Right now, unfortunately, Dalton Varsho probably would be. We will see, but those are the names. It doesn't run particularly deep that I think we're talking about come deadline time.
Yeah, and that's sort of the problem too, because of the first half performance of a lot of these guys, their actual trade market value is not really fairly represented by their potential. But not many
Mm,
people on this team, with the sort of, there's Cease obviously living up to the contract and
yeah.
the potential. Yaz doing the same thing, or sorry, Kaz doing the same thing. But it's just you look down the stretch here. I identified a couple of names, and you just mentioned one of them, of people whose second half I think whether they make a playoff run or not, have to be kept a close eye on. And at the top of that list for me is Shane Bieber because he struggled out of the gate. His last start, he had a bad first inning, but then he settled. He has not performed yet, coming off of that injury up to his potential, but he's in once again a contract year, and he's not played at a level that would make him a piece to deal. Like who obviously Gossman's the guy a team would be going
Mm.
after on this pitching staff to try and help them down the stretch. But Bieber finds himself in a very unique situation right now. If he doesn't start performing up to last year's level soon, the Jays won't have any interest in re-signing him, and his offseason value will tank.
It will, and so you have $16 million in salary for him this year. Cut that by a third, right? So a little bit better than. Well, I guess we're going to be less than a third of the season by the time we get to the deadline. But call it somewhere near 5 million and change that will be due to him over those last couple of months. Even to save yourself a couple of $1 million if he shows some level of improvement. I think a little bit more swing and miss out of his game, right? The walk rate isn't great. The strikeout rate isn't great right now. If he has a couple of good ones, right? You mentioned some of the good teams that they're going to be playing against. So he will be pitching against contenders leading into it. 2 or 3 really good starts or just showing signs of improvement. Would someone take him for a couple of million and when it's really difficult to acquire starting pitching? Maybe. That's pretty much all you're going to get, though, is likely some financial relief with him. And you bring up a good point, right? Highly motivated to be able to get that trade value up. And so if they don't trade him, that's where the focus will be for him personally the rest of the regular season. But if he finds himself with a contender, can he turn it on and find a way? It's a lot of hope in that that maybe it can happen. But yeah, sure, that's a name. Definitely, if that happens, that's what scouts are going to be looking for. How is the stuff playing? How's the swing and miss looking? How is the command? The command isn't there right now yet for him. If those things get better, and you do have to give a guy a little bit of space when he's coming off an injury to find some consistency. If he does, I think the best you do is save a couple of $1 million over those last couple of months of the season. I don't think they would do this, but you always call, you always ask. Ernie Clement's having a monster season. Ernie Clement is a couple of years away from free agency. That's an interesting one because he's a 4+ player. Again, I think they're going right back into contention next year. But it is kind of an intriguing name. Yeah, he's $4.5 million. That number's going to go up, but they have him for the next couple. It's probably a no for me, unless somebody gets a little bit desperate. He is better than 30 years old, so it could be a surprise conversation, but only if you feel like you're winning that trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point they're probably in a position to be listening to just about anyone in conversation on this because if you can move pieces for better pieces, you do it. But as you say, I expect this team to be right back into contention next year. It was a cavalcade of errors and folly for them that led to a lot of this and then an inability to perform. So I want to look at one other pitcher here too, and someone that they have always pointed to as anchoring this staff for years to come, but he's been inconsistent coming back from injury. He's had amazing looking starts, and then he's floundered a little bit here and there. Trey Savage, he's still finding his stability, but you're still seeing those signs of greatness. But I think for him, even just moving forward through his career, it's important to have a very consistent uh, presence on the mound across the rest of his performances for the rest of this season.
I agree. And there's two things there. One is establishing yourself as the ace that we know he can believe, that we all can believe in, and that he's your opening day starter as your true ace next year. I get it. Dylan Cease is there and he's been more consistent, but you want to see that kind of continued progression here for Trey Savage. Not saying he has to start opening day next year, but you're feeling like you actually have two aces in him and Dylan
Mhm.
Cease, right? That'll make everybody feel better going into the winter if you see that more consistent version of Trey Savage. Same thing. I got to give him some of that leeway as far as the comfort level coming back from injury. We are now 14 starts into this thing, though, and you feel like that probably should be there. It is kind of amazing to watch where that walk and the lack of command will go at times
Mhm.
during a game, right? Just when you think he has it. I know the last one was an extreme where he ends up walking 7, right? But there's been some others where it feels like it's 0, 1, 2 walks or like 5 or more. Right. There's like this in between for him where either he's got the great command that day or he doesn't, or he's just not getting the chase. Right. A lot of times with these guys that have that really good split that come from the unique arm angle that he has, it's about whether or not he's getting that chase. You get the chase if you're getting ahead in the count. You got to be able to show you can throw that split for strikes that day because then you can throw it out of the zone to get chased. When that doesn't happen, you get a much more patient lineup and then the walks start to go up, right? So I think that is a really important thing to keep an eye on with him the rest of the way. We all know what he's capable of doing. We have seen it at times this year. There's just been a little bit more of that up and down. Does it mean he has to have, whatever it's going to be 8 great starts the rest of the way? No, but you'd like to see a little bit more consistency. And then when he has the one that gets away from him, that you can still find a way to keep your team in it, right? That's where you start
Mhm.
to separate yourself as one of the better pitchers in the game. You're going to have days where you don't feel great, but can you keep your team in a position to potentially win that game? More consistency and seeing some of those where it's like, hey, we still have a chance. He had his B stuff today or had his C stuff, but he found a way to keep us in the game. And maybe it's only a 5 inning outing, but the game is still within reach because you don't have an inning that gets away from you.
It also doesn't help him much that he set perhaps the most astronomically high expectations a pitcher could ever set with that performance. Like last season, it was
Yeah.
unprecedented on so many levels, and it continued right into the World Series. That's a high bar to clear, but I mean, he does seem to have the mindset to do so. And one last player to discuss about their second half, and this to me is the crucial piece for this baseball team. We've beaten this topic to death a little bit. I mean, all channels, all networks have, but it seems crucial that moving forward with this franchise, if this season's a bit of a wash at this point, that Vladimir Guerrero at least shows signs of returning to last year's form, starting with a harder hit ball rate and just should they mount a comeback, trying to be positive here, and should they mount an incredible second half, it's going to begin and end with him. And it's crucial to me, even leading into next season, that he does not finish this season the way it started.
Yep, I agree. A couple of home runs over his last 10 games certainly help. A couple of doubles in there. You just want to go into the offseason feeling better about, what the
Mhm.
first 4 months of the season or so look like, right? About 3.5 plus into this thing. I'm with you on that one. He's getting the fastballs. Those numbers have been good. I think what's happening on some of the spin is what's been a little bit of a surprise. Seeing that OPS as low as it is right now, like teetering right around 700, at times being below 700, is just completely unacceptable for who he is. When you sign that big contract and the biggest one like that he has, and all the drama that kind of went into it, what last year looked like, you can't afford to have big off years when you were still very much in your prime, right? He's going to go into his age 28 season next year. These are prime years right now for him, like over these next 4 or 5, where you expect consistency. There's going to be tail off. It happens, unfortunately, with a lot of players, but not at 27. right? That's what you start talking about in his 30s. So I'm sure he's been talking about it. As I'm looking at it right now, one number that kind of jumps off the page a little bit is watching that chase go up, which is
Yeah.
considerable for him. And that very much could be where he's trying to do a little bit too much, right? That's the mental side of the game more than the physical. I don't think he's not seeing the baseball well. I think he knows how his year has gone and he starts to chase it a little bit. So that's something that is going to have to improve along with hitting the baseball harder and getting the barrel to that baseball more consistently. We know he's not a big launch angle guy, never has been, right? Those lower line drive backspin home runs is kind of who Vladdy is. But 2.5 months to go, I'm with you. You're just, again, you'll feel a lot better. Okay, it's not going to be a postseason year for the Jays, but what do those couple of things look like for Vladdy? What do they look like for Trey Savage and a couple of others going into the offseason?
How much good do you think the All-Star break did this team to have a bit of a reset? Because I mean, I remember talking to you about this 3 weeks ago, saying, "Hey, listen, if they run into this All-Star break hot, they would be poised for a second half resurgence here and a push towards that wild card spot." They did the exact opposite of that. And listen, we're kind of coming from a doom and gloom perspective, but we're really just evaluating what they've presented to us. The odds of them making the playoffs right now are not particularly good on the mathematical side of things, though
Mm.
nothing's impossible. But is there any chance this reset? I mean, the few players that went to the All-Star game, their coach went to the All-Star game, little R&R, just a mental reset, the pressure off them for a few days to perform. Is there any chance that that will contribute to something big? But as we said, the next 9 games against these teams they're really everything.
So it's always possible, right? You just never completely know where guys are mentally, and we have an idea where they could be physically. We don't always know everything, right? So they went limping in, or guys dragging a little bit. Are they feeling weighed down by the heavy expectations that came with this season because of what happened last year? And it almost seems shocking when you had that uniform on, when you put this kind of roster together, you have the kind of offseason the Jays had that you couldn't even come close to meeting the expectations. That is a real thing for players when they have the uniform on. Now, can you get the reset over those few days of the break for those who actually got the full break? Maybe. We'll see. Ultimately, do guys come out a little bit fresher? Do they look a little bit sharper? The worst thing that can happen is the opposite, where you have these couple of days, you try to take the mental break, and then all of a sudden the physical isn't there. I don't know what the Jays decided to do. A lot of teams will have an optional workout depending on what your offseason, or excuse me, what your All-Star break look like over these last couple of days. You don't really want guys coming in not having done something, at least with the team, preferably, but getting stuff done. But we're going to find out real quickly here tonight as far as how things went and how guys are looking. So I'm looking at the odds right now, and there's different places. And as you talked about some of that math, so it's just under a 12% chance of making it to the postseason. Actually, a little bit higher than I anticipated, to be honest with you, looking at it. And those odds are going to go one way or the other. Pretty quickly here over those next few, but we'll get an answer as far as how these guys felt, what the All-Star break looked like, and whether or not there's real bounce back.
Well, CJ, I typed what are the optimistic odds for the Blue Jays to make the playoffs, and I found a 20%. So I'm going to cling to
Ooh,
that. I'm going to cling to
nice.
that. We have to up here in the north. We can't breathe the air. We might as well breathe in some more of this baseball. We might as well breathe in some more of this baseball team for the rest of the season. But you know what? Thanks for joining us today. It's going to be
Yeah.
interesting to have these chats with you. A week apart here, and as this record goes one way or the other, and they become either deadline buyers or sellers, it's going to be very interesting to follow how this team begins to position itself for next season and when it's made clear that they'll do exactly that.
I agree. And this is a big homestand, right? It's not only that, we talk about the first kind of three series that they have, but because you're doing it at home, the other part is trying to
Mhm.
keep your fans engaged as much as possible. And so play well at home to kick things off here after the All-Star break. Give them a little bit of glimmer of hope. So they're going to want to continue to come out and watch you, that they're going to continue to want to watch the games and talk about this team.
Well, the Blue Jays right now are currently benefiting from both the Toronto Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs making a ton of noise in the offseason. So they're being provided cover in the field right now. But this is this is the home stretch, and I don't know how much longer that'll last. CJ, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
All right. Sounds good, Kyle.